Ever wonder what sweet treats folks shared during America's toughest economic crisis?
The second dish of this demonstration is called cottage pie.
The Great Depression hit hard in 1929, and suddenly families across the nation had to make every penny and every ingredient count.
The staff of life, energy, cooked by electrical energy.
Church communities became crucial centers for sharing dessert recipes that could satisfy sweet cravings on a tight budget. These treats weren't just about survival. They became comfort foods passed down through generations. Let's dive into 30 incredible church desserts from the Great Depression era that are still worth making today. Mock apple pie. Mock apple pie stands as perhaps the most ingenious culinary deception of the Depression era, creating a dessert that tastes remarkably like apple pie without using a single apple. This creative substitution became popular when fruit was prohibitively expensive for most families. The pie fills a standard crust with Ritz crackers or similar crackers soaked in a syrup of sugar, water, cream of tartar, and lemon juice, which miraculously takes on an apple-like flavor and texture when baked. Church bake sales frequently featured mock apple pies, often not advertising their cracker base, making them something of a delightful surprise when the secret was revealed. Water pie. Water pie sounds impossible, a dessert where the main ingredient is literally water. Yet this ingenious creation became a signature of church bake sales during the Depression, when milk, fruits, and nuts were often unaffordable luxuries. The recipe originated in Southern church communities, with the First Presbyterian Church of Memphis having one of the earliest documented versions in their 1931 fundraising cookbook. The pie uses a simple pastry crust filled with a mixture of water, sugar, flour, butter, and vanilla extract. When baked, the ingredients transform almost magically into a custard-like filling with a delicate sweet flavor. Vinegar pie. Vinegar pie emerged as a creative solution when fruit for pies was scarce or prohibitively expensive. This ingenious dessert uses vinegar to provide a tangy flavor reminiscent of lemon, creating a simple custard pie with ingredients most households had on hand. The First Methodist Church of Springfield, Illinois, included a treasured vinegar pie recipe in their 1930 community cookbook, describing it as a pie for when the apple barrel is empty. The standard recipe combines sugar, eggs, a small amount of vinegar, usually apple cider vinegar, butter, and warm spices like cinnamon or nutmeg in a single pie crust. Church socials often featured vinegar pies, especially during winter and early spring, when fruit was unavailable. Tomato soup cake. Tomato soup cake sounds bizarre to modern ears, but was a stroke of genius during the Depression, when fresh fruit for cake was unaffordable. This spice cake uses canned tomato soup to provide moisture, acidity, and subtle flavor, replacing more expensive ingredients. The cake combines a can of tomato soup with flour, sugar, lard or oil, spices like cinnamon and cloves, and baking soda, creating a moist spice cake reminiscent of modern carrot cake but without costly additions. Church bake sales frequently featured tomato soup cake, often topped with cream cheese frosting when ingredients allowed, or simply dusted with saved sugar. Mayonnaise cake. Mayonnaise cake solved the problem of making a tender, moist chocolate cake without eggs or butter by using mayonnaise, which contains both eggs and oil, as a clever substitution. Church bake sales featured this resourceful dessert throughout the Depression. Their recipe combined flour, sugar, cocoa powder, water, and mayonnaise to create a surprisingly rich chocolate cake without requiring expensive dairy ingredients. Church gatherings often included mayonnaise cake for celebrations and special occasions, as it allowed families to enjoy treats even when traditional baking ingredients were scarce. Sunday school teachers particularly favored this recipe for children's events, as it reliably produced a delicious cake despite its unusual method. Wacky cake. Wacky cake, also called crazy cake or depression cake, solved the problem of making dessert without eggs, milk, or butter, all expensive or hard-to-find ingredients during the Depression. This ingenious chocolate cake became a staple of church bake sales and celebrations. The Women's Auxiliary of Grace Episcopal Church in Cleveland published one of the first documented recipes in their 1933 fundraising cookbook. The cake uses vinegar and baking soda for leavening, vegetable oil instead of butter, and cocoa powder for chocolate flavor. Most distinctively, the ingredients are mixed directly in the baking pan, creating fewer dishes to wash. Another practical consideration when soap was a luxury. Church functions frequently featured wacky cake because it could be made quickly, inexpensively, and in large quantities. Sunday school teachers would often prepare it for children's events, as it was both economical and reliably delicious. Cornmeal pudding. Cornmeal pudding transformed humble cornmeal into a sweet custard-like dessert that satisfied Depression-era sweet tooth cravings with minimal cost. Church communities throughout the South embraced this simple dessert for both family meals and larger gatherings. The Baptist Women's Missionary Union of Alabama published a notable recipe in their 1933 community cookbook, describing cornmeal pudding as sweetness from the pantry when sugar is scarce. Their recipe slowly cooked cornmeal in milk when available, or water when not, sweetened with molasses or saved sugar, and flavored with cinnamon or vanilla extract if such luxuries could be afforded. Church events often featured large pans of cornmeal pudding, especially after Sunday services when families gathered for fellowship meals. The dish could be served warm or cold, making it practical for community gatherings with limited serving facilities. What made cornmeal pudding particularly valuable during the Depression was its ability to create a satisfying dessert from ingredients that were among the most affordable available. The creamy texture and gentle sweetness provided comfort during difficult times while utilizing cornmeal that many rural families could obtain. Oatmeal pie. Oatmeal pie became known as poor man's pecan pie during the Depression, creating a dessert with similar texture and sweetness using affordable oats instead of expensive nuts. This ingenious substitution allowed church communities to serve elegant-tasting pies at bake sales and social gatherings without breaking tight budgets. The Methodist Women's Circle of rural Kentucky published a widely shared recipe in their 1934 fundraising cookbook, noting that oats can fool the finest palate when prepared with care. The pie combines oats with eggs when available, corn syrup or molasses, butter or lard, and vanilla flavoring in a single pie crust. When baked, the oats create a chewy, sweet filling, remarkably similar to pecan pie's texture and taste. Church socials frequently featured oatmeal pies, especially during autumn months when the comfort of warm, sweet desserts was most appreciated. Sunday school fundraisers found these pies particularly profitable because they could be made so inexpensively, yet sold at regular pie prices. Green tomato pie. Green tomato pie emerged as a clever solution when fruit for desserts was unaffordable, utilizing unripe tomatoes from summer gardens that would otherwise go to waste. Church communities in rural areas particularly embraced this resourceful dessert during late summer months. The Lutheran Ladies' Aid Society of Wisconsin's farming communities published a treasured recipe in their 1932 cookbook, explaining that what seems like vegetables can become sweetest desserts with proper care. The pie combines sliced green tomatoes with sugar, flour, spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, and lemon juice if available, all baked in a double crust. Church harvest festivals often featured green tomato pies as a way to celebrate the end of growing season while using produce that might otherwise be lost to frost. Women's auxiliary groups appreciated how the recipe allowed them to create desserts for fundraising events, using ingredients that cost virtually nothing from their own gardens. What made green tomato pie particularly ingenious during the Depression was its transformation of a garden surplus into a sweet treat, demonstrating the period's waste-nothing philosophy. Peanut butter bread. Peanut butter bread offered a protein-rich alternative to traditional breads when eggs and milk were scarce, serving double duty as both bread and dessert, depending on preparation. This dense, satisfying bread became popular in church communities where feeding children nutritious food on a limited budget was a constant challenge. The simple recipe requires just flour, baking powder, salt, sugar, milk or water in the strictest times, and peanut butter, creating a hearty bread without yeast, eggs, or butter. Church bake sales often featured peanut butter bread, and it was frequently included in food baskets distributed to families in need. The dense texture and slightly sweet, nutty flavor made it popular with children, ensuring they would eat this economical food without complaint. When served with a light dusting of sugar or drizzle of molasses, it transformed from everyday bread into a special dessert treat. Molasses cake. Molasses cake emerged as a rich, satisfying dessert during the Depression when refined sugar was expensive, but molasses remained an affordable sweetener. This dark, spiced cake became a staple of church gatherings throughout rural America, where molasses was often the only sweetening available. The cake combines flour, molasses, lard or saved bacon drippings, baking soda, and warm spices like ginger, cinnamon, and cloves, creating a moist, deeply flavored cake. The cake could be baked in large sheet pans to feed many people inexpensively, making it ideal for church basement dinners and community gatherings. Sunday school teachers particularly appreciated molasses cake because children enjoyed its sweet, spicy flavor, while parents appreciated its nutritional value. What made molasses cake especially practical during the Depression was molasses' affordability and long shelf life, allowing families to keep the ingredients on hand for special occasions, even during the hardest times. Molasses cookies. Molasses cookies became the go-to sweet treat for Sunday school classes and church events during the Depression, offering chewy, spiced comfort from one of the era's most affordable sweeteners. Church communities across America embraced these simple cookies because they could be made in large batches with minimal cost. The basic recipe combines flour, molasses, lard or vegetable shortening, baking soda, salt, and warm spices like ginger and cinnamon, rolled into balls and baked until just set. Children's Bible classes frequently featured molasses cookies as special treats, with Sunday school teachers preparing dozens at a time using church kitchen facilities. The cookies' chewy texture and warming spices made them particularly popular during fall and winter months when comfort foods were most needed. What made molasses cookies especially valuable during the Depression was their ability to satisfy sweet cravings while providing some nutritional value. Snickerdoodles. Snickerdoodles became beloved fixtures at every church social during the Depression, offering cinnamon sugar sweetness from basic pantry ingredients. These simple cookies required no expensive additions, yet provided the comfort of familiar flavors that reminded families of better times. The recipe combines flour, butter or lard, sugar, eggs when available, cream of tartar, baking soda, and salt, with the distinctive finishing touch of rolling the dough in cinnamon sugar before baking. Church fellowship halls regularly featured plates of snickerdoodles at monthly community meals and special celebrations. What made snickerdoodles particularly practical during the Depression was their simplicity and reliability. The recipe rarely failed and produced consistently delicious results, making them perfect for church functions where success was crucial for community morale and fundraising efforts. Peanut butter cookies. Peanut butter cookies offered protein-rich sweetness that satisfied both nutritional needs and dessert cravings during the Depression when treats had to serve multiple purposes. Church communities particularly valued these simple cookies for children's events and family gatherings. The basic recipe requires just flour, peanut butter, sugar or molasses, an egg if available, and baking soda, creating substantial cookies that provided lasting satisfaction. Sunday school teachers frequently prepared peanut butter cookies for children's classes, knowing that parents appreciated treats that offered actual nutritional value rather than empty calories. The cookie's dense texture and rich peanut flavor made a few cookies feel like a substantial treat rather than an empty indulgence. These cookies represented the era's practical approach to desserts, treats that satisfied cravings while contributing meaningful nutrition to limited diets. Cornflake cookies. Cornflake cookies transformed breakfast cereal into delightful bake sale treats during the Depression, demonstrating the era's creative approach to using available ingredients in unexpected ways. Church communities discovered that cornflakes could add interesting texture and mild sweetness to simple cookie recipes. The cookies combine crushed cornflakes with flour, butter or lard, sugar, eggs when available, and vanilla flavoring if such luxuries could be afforded, creating crispy, chewy treats with distinctive texture. Church bake sales frequently included cornflake cookies because they were economical to produce, yet offered something different from standard cookie offerings. What made cornflake cookies particularly practical during the Depression was their use of cereal that many families already had on hand, eliminating the need to purchase special baking ingredients. These cookies exemplified the period's resourcefulness, turning everyday breakfast items into special treats that brought variety to church gatherings and family celebrations. Coconut macaroons. Coconut macaroons provided chewy, tropical-flavored sweetness during the Depression, using minimal ingredients that created maximum impact. These simple cookies became popular at church bake sales because they seemed more exotic than their humble ingredient list suggested. The basic recipe combines shredded coconut, egg whites when available, sugar, and sometimes a small amount of flour for binding, creating intensely flavored, chewy cookies. Church socials often featured coconut macaroons as special treats, particularly in coastal communities where coconut was more readily available and affordable. Women's groups appreciated how a small amount of coconut could produce a substantial number of cookies that satisfied sweet cravings with just 1 or 2 pieces. These cookies proved that exotic flavors were possible even during economic hardship, providing small luxuries that lifted spirits during difficult times. Bread pudding. Bread pudding exemplified the waste-nothing philosophy of the Depression, transforming stale bread, which no family could afford to throw away, into a comforting dessert. Church communities embraced this thrifty dessert for both family meals and larger gatherings. Their recipe soaked stale bread in a mixture of milk, sugar, eggs if available, applesauce if not, cinnamon, and perhaps a handful of raisins if such luxuries could be afforded. Church events often featured large pans of bread pudding, especially after communion services when leftover bread needed to be respectfully repurposed. The dish could be made in advance and served warm or cold, making it practical for community gatherings with limited cooking facilities. What made bread pudding particularly important during the Depression was its role in eliminating food waste. Even the hardest bread crusts could be softened and transformed. Many families received day-old bread from church relief programs, and bread pudding offered a way to make this charity feel like a treat rather than a hardship. Rice pudding. Rice pudding transformed leftover rice into a creamy, satisfying dessert that provided comfort during the Depression's darkest days. Church communities throughout America embraced this simple dessert because it could feed many people using ingredients that were among the most affordable available. The basic recipe slowly cooked leftover rice in milk when available, or water with a small amount of saved cream, sweetened with sugar or molasses and flavored with cinnamon, nutmeg, or vanilla extract if such luxuries could be afforded. Church fellowship meals regularly featured large pots of rice pudding, especially during winter months when warm, comforting desserts provided both physical and emotional nourishment. What made rice pudding particularly valuable during the Depression was its use of rice that many families maintained as an affordable staple, and its ability to transform small amounts of leftover rice into substantial desserts. Steamed suet pudding. Steamed suet pudding represented an English culinary tradition that lingered in American church kitchens during the Depression, providing rich, satisfying dessert from beef fat that butchers often gave away free. This dense, moist pudding became particularly popular in church communities with strong British heritage. The Anglican Church Women of Boston published a traditional recipe in their 1931 community cookbook, explaining that suet pudding provides warmth and sustenance when winter winds blow harsh. The pudding combines beef suet, flour, breadcrumbs, molasses or sugar, dried fruit if available, and warm spices like cinnamon and cloves, all steamed slowly in a cloth or bowl for several hours. Gelatin. Church salad. Gelatin church salad became the colorful centerpiece of church potluck tables during the Depression, transforming inexpensive gelatin into festive-looking desserts that brightened community gatherings. These wobbly creations combined sweet and savory elements in ways that seem unusual today, but provided variety during times when ingredients were limited. The Lutheran Ladies' Aid Society of Iowa published multiple gelatin recipes in their 1934 community cookbook, noting that gelatin salads bring color and celebration to any church table. The recipes typically combined flavored gelatin with whatever additions were available: canned fruit, marshmallows, nuts if affordable, cottage cheese, or even vegetables like cabbage or carrots. Custard pie squares. Custard pie squares solved the practical problem of serving pie to large church gatherings by baking custard filling in large sheet pans rather than individual pie tins, allowing church kitchens to feed many people efficiently. This adaptation of traditional custard pie became a staple of church fellowship meals throughout the Depression. The Baptist Women's Missionary Union of Texas published a practical recipe in their 1935 community cookbook, explaining that sheet pan custards feed the multitude like the loaves and fishes. The recipe combines eggs when available, milk, sugar, flour for thickening, and vanilla flavoring if such luxuries could be afforded, all baked in greased sheet pans and cut into squares for serving. Church basement kitchens frequently prepared custard squares for monthly community meals and special celebrations because they could be made in church ovens and served to dozens of people from single pans. Snow cream. Snow cream represented the ultimate free dessert during Depression winters, transforming fresh snowfall into sweet treats that delighted children and provided families with rare dessert opportunities that cost virtually nothing. Church communities throughout northern regions embraced this simple pleasure, often organizing snow cream socials after winter storms. The Methodist Women's Circle of rural Wisconsin included instructions in their 1933 community handbook, noting that God provides sweetness even in winter's harshest gifts. The recipe simply combines clean, fresh snow with milk or cream when available, sugar or molasses, and vanilla extract if such luxuries could be afforded, creating instant ice cream-like treats. Church basement ice cream. Church basement ice cream became community events during the Depression, bringing neighbors together to hand-crank frozen desserts that individual families couldn't afford to make alone. These gatherings served both social and practical purposes, pooling resources and labor to create special treats for entire church communities. The Congregational Church Women of rural Kansas organized monthly ice cream socials throughout the summer, with their 1934 handbook explaining that shared labor creates sweeter rewards. The ice cream typically used milk donations from church families with cows, eggs when available, sugar or molasses, and flavorings like vanilla extract, if affordable, all churned slowly in hand-cranked freezers packed with ice and salt. Church fellowship halls became centers of activity during ice cream making sessions, with families taking turns at the crank while children waited eagerly for the finished product. These events often combined ice cream making with other social activities like hymn singing and community updates, strengthening church bonds during difficult times. Frozen fruit salad. Frozen fruit salad became a special treat at church gatherings during the Depression, utilizing church freezer facilities to create desserts that individual families couldn't make at home. This creamy, frozen dessert combined whatever fruits were available with simple ingredients to create something that felt luxurious, despite its humble components. The Episcopal Church Women of St. Mark's in Philadelphia published a popular recipe in their 1936 community cookbook, describing frozen fruit salad as summer preserved in winter's embrace. The recipe combined drained canned fruit or preserved fruit with whipped cream when available, marshmallows, and sometimes nuts if such luxuries could be afforded, all frozen together in church iceboxes or the few electric freezers that churches might possess. Church socials during summer months often featured frozen fruit salads as refreshing desserts that provided cooling relief during hot weather when air conditioning was non-existent. Women's auxiliary groups particularly appreciated frozen fruit salads for special events like church anniversaries or visiting speaker dinners when impressive desserts were needed. But budgets remained tight. The salads could be prepared days in advance and portioned for exact serving numbers, making them practical for planned church functions. What made frozen fruit salad especially valuable during the Depression was its use of church facilities that individual families lacked, allowing communities to create desserts that seemed festive and special, while utilizing donated or inexpensive ingredients that members could contribute collectively. Apple pandowdy. Apple pandowdy emerged as the rustic cousin of apple pie during the Depression, requiring less precision and fewer ingredients, while delivering the comfort of apple desserts that families craved during fall months. This simple baked dessert became a staple of church harvest festivals throughout rural America. The Baptist Women's Missionary Union of Virginia published a beloved recipe in their 1933 community cookbook, describing apple pandowdy as autumn's comfort in a pan. The recipe combines sliced apples with sugar or molasses, cinnamon, and sometimes a bit of flour for thickening, topped with simple biscuit dough or pie crust scraps, and baked until golden. Church fellowship halls frequently featured large pans of apple pandowdy during October and November gatherings when apples were harvested and families needed ways to use abundant seasonal fruit. Sunday school harvest festivals often included apple pandowdy as traditional desserts that connected congregations to agricultural rhythms and seasonal celebrations. The dessert's rustic appearance made it forgiving for inexperienced bakers, while its familiar flavors provided comfort during uncertain times. What made apple pandowdy particularly practical during the Depression was its flexibility. It could accommodate whatever apples were available, from perfect fruit to windfalls and imperfect apples that couldn't be sold, embodying the era's waste-nothing philosophy while creating satisfying desserts for church community gatherings. Rhubarb crisp. Rhubarb crisp celebrated spring's first fruit during the Depression, utilizing the tart vegetable that grew abundantly in church gardens and provided fresh ingredients when winter stores were depleted. This simple baked dessert became a welcome sight at church potlucks during late spring months, when fresh foods were desperately needed. The Lutheran Ladies' Aid Society of Minnesota published a cherished recipe in their 1932 community cookbook, noting that rhubarb announces spring's return with tart sweetness. The crisp combines chopped rhubarb with sugar or molasses to balance the tartness, topped with a mixture of oats, flour and whatever fat was available, butter, lard, or saved bacon drippings, creating a crunchy topping that contrasted beautifully with the soft, tart fruit beneath. Church fellowship meals in May and June regularly featured rhubarb crisp as seasonal desserts that celebrated the end of winter's limited menu. Women's auxiliary groups particularly appreciated rhubarb because it grew prolifically in church gardens and members' yards, requiring no purchase while providing genuine fruit flavors after months of preserved or canned options. Sunday school classes sometimes included rhubarb crisp as rewards for good behavior or special achievements, with children gradually acquiring tastes for the tart flavors. What made rhubarb crisp especially valuable during the Depression was its use of produce that was essentially free and abundant, demonstrating how communities could create satisfying desserts from ingredients that required only labor and creativity rather than precious cash resources. Coconut cream pie. Coconut cream pie represented a rare but treasured luxury at church supper gatherings during the Depression, created when communities could pool resources to afford ingredients that individual families couldn't purchase alone. This creamy, elegant dessert became reserved for special occasions and important church celebrations. The Presbyterian Women's Circle of Charleston included a prized recipe in their 1934 fundraising cookbook, describing coconut cream pie as a taste of paradise when earth feels harsh. The pie combines a pastry crust with custard filling made from eggs when available, milk, sugar, and shredded coconut, often topped with meringue made from saved egg whites. Church anniversary celebrations and visiting minister dinners occasionally featured coconut cream pies when women's groups decided to create something truly special despite the expense. The pies required careful preparation and timing, making them symbols of dedication and special effort rather than everyday treats. Sunday school superintendent appreciation dinners sometimes included coconut cream pie as ways to honor volunteer leadership with desserts that demonstrated genuine sacrifice and care. Date nut bars. Date nut bars became the go-to dessert for church funeral receptions and community consolation during the Depression, providing dense, sweet comfort that traveled well and fed many people with relatively inexpensive ingredients. These substantial bars offered both emotional and physical sustenance during difficult times when communities needed to support grieving families. The Methodist Women's Circle of rural Oklahoma published a respected recipe in their 1933 community cookbook, describing date nut bars as sweetness for sorrowful times. The bars combine chopped dates, nuts when available or affordable, flour, eggs, sugar, or molasses, and warm spices like cinnamon, baked in sheet pans and cut into portable squares. Church committees frequently prepared date nut bars for funeral luncheons because they could be made in advance, transported easily, and provided substantial nourishment for mourning families and visiting relatives. Women's auxiliary groups appreciated how dates provided natural sweetness that reduced the need for expensive sugar while creating desserts that felt appropriate for solemn occasions. Chow Chow Relish Cake. Add-on Chow Chow Relish Cake. Add-on represented the Southern tradition of pairing tangy vegetable relishes with sweet cakes during the Depression, creating flavor combinations that seemed unusual but provided variety when dessert options were severely limited. Church communities throughout the South discovered that the sharp, pickled flavors of Chow Chow relish complemented simple cakes in surprising ways. The Baptist Women's Missionary Union of North Carolina included notes about this pairing in their 1935 community cookbook, explaining that sweet and sour together make plain cakes special. The practice involved serving small spoonfuls of homemade chow chow relish alongside simple molasses or cornmeal cakes, creating complex flavor experiences from basic ingredients. Church fellowship meals occasionally featured this combination when both cakes and preserved relishes were available from church members' pantries and gardens. Milk toast. Sweet version, milk toast sweet version, represented perhaps the humblest dessert that still provided comfort during the Depression's darkest days, transforming the basic invalid food into something approaching a sweet treat through minimal additions. Church communities recommended this simple preparation for feeding the sick, elderly, and very young when resources were severely limited, but some sweetness was desperately needed. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was active in many churches, included instructions in their 1931 household guide, noting that even milk toast can become dessert with prayer and imagination. The sweet version involved toasting homemade bread, buttering it lightly if possible, then pouring warm milk over it and adding a sprinkle of sugar, cinnamon, or saved molasses to create something approaching dessert rather than mere sustenance. Church visiting committees would often prepare sweet milk toast for shut-ins and ill congregation members when regular desserts were impossible but some comfort was needed. Sunday school teachers occasionally offered sweet milk toast to children who were feeling unwell. Buttermilk pie. Buttermilk pie emerged as a Southern church staple during the Depression, transforming the tangy liquid left over from butter, making into a creamy, custard-like dessert that satisfied sweet cravings with ingredients most farm families had available. This simple pie became beloved throughout rural church communities where dairy farming provided one of the few reliable food sources during economic hardship. The Methodist Women's Circle of rural Georgia published a treasured recipe in their 1933 community cookbook, describing buttermilk pie as proof that sour can become sweet with patience and prayer. The pie combines buttermilk with eggs when available, sugar or molasses, flour for thickening, butter if possible, and vanilla extract if such luxuries could be afforded, all baked in a simple pastry crust until set. Church fellowship meals regularly featured buttermilk pies, especially in farming communities where buttermilk was abundant, but often went to waste if not used quickly. Women's auxiliary groups appreciated how buttermilk pie used an ingredient that might otherwise be discarded, creating elegant desserts from what many considered a byproduct. Chess pie. Chess pie became a church dessert legend during the Depression, creating rich, satisfying sweetness from basic pantry staples that most households maintained even during the hardest times. This simple custard pie required no special ingredients, yet delivered complex flavors that impressed church gatherings and bake sale customers throughout the South. The Baptist Women's Missionary Union of Kentucky published a celebrated recipe in their 1934 community cookbook, explaining that chess pie makes much from little as the Lord multiplies loaves and fishes. The pie combines eggs, sugar, butter when available or lard when not, cornmeal for texture, vinegar for tang, and vanilla extract if affordable, all whisked together and baked in a single pie crust until golden. Church bake sales frequently featured chess pies because they traveled well, maintained their texture for days, and satisfied customers with their rich, almost caramel-like flavor despite humble ingredients. Women's groups particularly appreciated how chess pie could be made without milk or cream, eliminating ingredients that were often scarce or too expensive for many families. Sunday school fundraisers found chess pies profitable because they required minimal ingredients yet commanded regular pie prices from appreciative customers. Vinegar candy. Vinegar candy represented the ultimate frugal confection during the Depression, transforming common household vinegar into hard candy treats that delighted children and provided sweet comfort when store-bought candy was an impossible luxury. Church communities across rural America discovered that this simple candy could be made with ingredients available in most households, requiring only sugar, vinegar, and careful attention to create genuine treats. The Lutheran Ladies' Aid Society of rural Pennsylvania published instructions in their 1932 Community Handbook, noting that vinegar candy proves sweetness can emerge from the sourest beginnings. The candy requires slowly heating sugar and vinegar together until the mixture reaches hard crack stage, then pouring onto greased plates or into small molds to cool into amber-colored hard candies. Sunday school teachers frequently made vinegar candy as special rewards for children's achievements, knowing that these homemade treats would be treasured when commercial candy was beyond family budgets. Church Christmas celebrations sometimes included vinegar candy as simple gifts that children could make for their families, teaching both economy and the joy of creating something special from basic ingredients. Women's auxiliary groups appreciated how vinegar candy required no special equipment beyond a heavy saucepan and provided candy-making experience without expensive ingredients like cream or nuts. The candy's sharp, sweet flavor profile created a unique taste experience that distinguished it from more common Depression-era desserts, while its long-keeping quality made it practical for gift-giving and special occasions. Persimmon pudding. Persimmon pudding celebrated autumn's free harvest during the Depression, utilizing wild persimmons that grew abundantly throughout the rural South and Midwest when families needed every possible food source. This dense, spiced pudding became a beloved seasonal dessert at church gatherings when persimmons ripened and provided rare fruit sweetness without cost. The Methodist Women's Circle of rural Indiana published a treasured recipe in their 1933 community cookbook, describing persimmon pudding as October's gift to empty pantries. The pudding combines persimmon pulp obtained by pressing ripe fruit through sieves with flour, sugar, or molasses, eggs when available, milk if possible, and warm spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger, all baked slowly until set. Church harvest festivals regularly featured persimmon pudding as seasonal specialties that connected congregations to natural abundance and traditional food-gathering practices. Children often participated in persimmon gathering expeditions organized by Sunday school classes, learning to identify ripe fruit while contributing to community food supplies. Women's auxiliary groups appreciated how persimmon pudding utilized fruit that required only labor to harvest and process, creating substantial desserts without cash expenditure. The pudding's dense texture and complex spiced flavor provided satisfying dessert experiences that rivaled more expensive options while celebrating regional food traditions. Sweet potato custard. Sweet potato custard transformed abundant root vegetables into elegant custard desserts during the Depression, utilizing sweet potatoes that many rural families grew as reliable food crops that stored well through winter months. This smooth, spiced custard became a staple of church fellowship meals throughout the South, where sweet potatoes grew prolifically and provided essential nutrition. The Baptist Women's Missionary Union of Mississippi published a beloved recipe in their 1934 community cookbook, calling sweet potato custard golden comfort from the earth's bounty. The custard combines cooked and mashed sweet potatoes with eggs when available, milk, sugar, or molasses, and warming spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla extract if affordable, all baked in custard cups or large pans until set. Church fellowship dinners frequently featured sweet potato custard as seasonal desserts that celebrated harvest abundance while providing substantial nutrition beyond simple sweetness. Honey cake. Honey cake provided natural sweetness during the Depression when refined sugar was expensive, but local beekeepers often traded honey for labor or goods, making this moist, spiced cake accessible to rural church communities. This dense, aromatic cake became particularly popular in areas where beekeeping provided alternative sweetening options during economic hardship. The Lutheran Church. Women of rural Wisconsin published a respected recipe in their 1935 community cookbook describing honey cake as sweetness that flows from cooperation with God's smallest workers. The cake combines honey with flour, eggs when available, a small amount of oil or melted lard, baking soda, and warm spices like cinnamon, cloves, and ginger, creating a moist cake with complex flavors that improved with age. Church fellowship meals often featured honey cakes, especially during late summer and fall, when honey harvests provided fresh supplies of this precious sweetener. Women's auxiliary groups appreciated how honey cakes could be made in large sheet pans to feed many people while utilizing sweetener that might be obtained through community connections rather than cash purchases. Sunday school celebrations sometimes included honey cakes as special treats that connected children to agricultural cycles and the importance of cooperation with nature. The cake's ability to remain moist for days made it practical for church functions and community gatherings where desserts needed to maintain quality throughout long events. What made honey cake particularly valuable during the Depression was honey's natural preservation qualities and nutritional benefits compared to refined sugar, while its availability through local trade networks demonstrated how communities could support each other through resource sharing rather than relying entirely on cash transactions. Milk glass candy. Milk glass candy created the illusion of store-bought confections during the Depression using simple ingredients that most households could afford, providing children with special treats that resembled expensive commercial candies. This clear, hard candy became popular at church functions where families wanted to create festive experiences without significant expense. Cornstarch pudding. Cornstarch pudding offered creamy comfort during the Depression using one of the most economical thickening agents available, creating satisfying desserts that rivaled more expensive custards and cream puddings. This simple pudding became a staple of church fellowship meals where large quantities of dessert needed to be prepared inexpensively. The Episcopal Church Women of rural Virginia published a practical recipe in their 1933 community cookbook, describing cornstarch pudding as silken comfort from humble beginnings. The pudding combines cornstarch with milk when available, or water with saved cream, sugar, and flavorings like vanilla extract or lemon juice if affordable, cooked slowly while stirring until thick and smooth. Church fellowship committees frequently prepared large batches of cornstarch pudding for community meals because it could feed many people using minimal ingredients while providing satisfying dessert experiences. Women's auxiliary groups appreciated how cornstarch pudding could be flavored in various ways, depending on available ingredients. Chocolate powder for chocolate pudding, fruit juices for fruit flavors, or spices for unique variations. Sunday school classes sometimes included cornstarch pudding as special treats because it could be made in church kitchen facilities and served warm or cold, depending on weather and preference. Gingerbread. Gingerbread maintained its position as a beloved church dessert during the Depression despite requiring multiple spices, as communities found ways to share spice resources and create this warming aromatic cake that provided comfort during harsh times. This dense, moist cake became especially important during winter months, when its warming spices offered psychological and physical comfort. The Baptist Women's Missionary Union of rural Tennessee published a celebrated recipe in their 1932 community cookbook, calling gingerbread warmth for body and soul when winter winds blow cold. The cake combines molasses as the primary sweetener with flour, lard, or oil, eggs when available, and a careful blend of ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg that families often pooled together from their precious spice supplies. Church fellowship meals during fall and winter months regularly featured gingerbread as seasonal desserts that provided comfort and celebration during the year's darkest months. Women's groups organized spice-sharing cooperatives where members contributed what spices they had to create community supplies for special baking projects like gingerbread for church functions. Sunday school classes sometimes made gingerbread as learning experiences that taught children about spice identification and careful measuring while creating treats that could be shared with families. Tapioca pudding. Tapioca pudding created elegant, creamy desserts during the Depression using pearl tapioca that was affordable, shelf-stable, and could create impressive presentations that belied its humble cost. This distinctive pudding became popular at church gatherings where its unique texture and mild flavor provided interesting alternatives to more common Depression-era desserts. The Lutheran Ladies' Aid Society of rural Minnesota published a treasured recipe in their 1934 community cookbook, describing tapioca pudding as pearls of comfort in troubled times. The pudding slowly cooks pearl tapioca in milk when available, or water with saved cream, sweetened with sugar or molasses, and often enriched with eggs if affordable, creating a creamy pudding studded with translucent tapioca pearls. Church fellowship meals frequently featured tapioca pudding because it could be prepared in large quantities relatively inexpensively, while providing desserts that seemed more sophisticated than their humble ingredients suggested. What made tapioca pudding especially practical during the Depression was pearl tapioca's long shelf life and reliability. Unlike fresh ingredients that could spoil, tapioca remained stable for months and produced consistent results when prepared properly, ensuring successful desserts for important church gatherings and community celebrations. If you're enjoying these Depression-era dessert recipes and want to help us continue bringing this forgotten culinary history to life, please consider supporting us on Patreon. The link is in the description below. Your membership helps us research and preserve these sweet traditions that tell the story of American resilience and creativity. Church communities relied on these desserts for monthly potlucks, bake sales, and community outreach, with some congregations serving weekly community meals throughout the Depression years. The tradition of church desserts that began during this era of necessity continues today, though modern versions typically include more abundant ingredients. Apple butter cookies. Apple butter cookies utilized homemade fruit preserves during the Depression to create chewy, spiced cookies that provided fruit flavor when fresh apples were unavailable or too expensive for most families. This practical cookie became popular throughout rural church communities where apple butter was commonly made during fall harvest times. The Methodist Women's Circle of rural Pennsylvania published a beloved recipe in their 1933 community cookbook, noting that apple butter cookies preserve autumn's sweetness through winter's lean months. The cookies combine apple butter with flour, lard, or oil, eggs when available, baking soda, and warming spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, creating chewy cookies with complex fruit flavors. Church bake sales frequently featured apple butter cookies because they provided fruit flavors without expensive additions like raisins or nuts, while their soft texture and spiced sweetness appealed to both children and adults. Women's auxiliary groups appreciated how apple butter cookies utilized preserves that many families made themselves from orchard windfalls or imperfect apples that couldn't be sold, demonstrating the era's commitment to using every possible food resource. Sunday school classes sometimes included apple butter cookies as seasonal treats that connected children to traditional food preservation practices while providing satisfying desserts. The cookies' ability to remain soft for several days made them practical for church functions where desserts needed to maintain quality throughout extended gatherings. What made apple butter cookies particularly valuable during the Depression was their use of preserved fruit that extended apple season beyond fall harvest, allowing families to enjoy fruit flavors throughout winter months while utilizing apple butter that required only labor and sugar to produce, embodying the era's essential principles of food preservation and waste prevention. Cottage cheese pancakes. Cottage cheese pancakes transformed protein-rich dairy into dessert-like treats during the Depression, utilizing cottage cheese that was often available even when other dairy products were scarce or expensive. These tender, slightly tangy pancakes became popular at church breakfast events and fellowship meals where protein-rich desserts were especially valued. The Lutheran Church Women of Wisconsin's dairy farming communities published a practical recipe in their 1935 community cookbook, describing cottage cheese pancakes as protein and pleasure combined in troubled times. The pancakes combine cottage cheese with eggs when available, flour, a small amount of sugar or molasses for sweetness, and baking powder, creating light, tender pancakes that could be served with fruit preserves or molasses. Church fellowship breakfast gatherings frequently featured cottage cheese pancakes because they provided substantial nutrition while satisfying sweet cravings, making them practical for events where both nourishment and dessert were needed. Women's groups particularly appreciated how cottage cheese pancakes could be made when fresh milk was unavailable, but cottage cheese remained accessible through local dairy connections or family cheese-making activities. Sunday school breakfast events sometimes included cottage cheese pancakes as special treats that demonstrated how everyday ingredients could be transformed into special occasion foods. Sorghum cookies. Sorghum cookies utilized regional sweeteners during the Depression, particularly in rural areas where sorghum molasses was produced locally and provided affordable sweetening alternatives to expensive refined sugar. These chewy, dark cookies became staples of church bake sales throughout the Midwest and South, where sorghum production was common. The Baptist Women's Missionary Union of rural Kansas published a respected recipe in their 1934 community cookbook, calling sorghum cookies sweetness from our own fields when store sugar seems like luxury. The cookies combine sorghum molasses with flour, lard, or oil, eggs when available, baking soda, and spices like ginger and cinnamon, creating dark, chewy cookies with distinctive molasses flavors. Church fellowship committees frequently featured sorghum cookies at community gatherings because they could be made relatively inexpensively using locally produced sweeteners that supported regional agricultural communities. Women's auxiliary groups appreciated how sorghum cookies provided ways to utilize sorghum molasses that might be available through trade or local production when refined sugar was prohibitively expensive. Sunday school fundraising events often included sorghum cookies because their unique flavor distinguished them from more common cookie offerings, while their economical ingredients allowed for reasonable pricing. The cookies' dense texture and complex sweetness made them satisfying treats that provided lasting energy and comfort during physically demanding farm work and economic stress. What made sorghum cookies particularly meaningful during the Depression was their connection to local agricultural production and community self-sufficiency, demonstrating how regional food systems could provide sweetness and celebration even when national economic systems were failing, while their distinctive flavor celebrated agricultural heritage and local food traditions. Buttermilk biscuits with honey. Buttermilk biscuits with honey transformed simple bread into dessert experiences during the Depression, utilizing buttermilk that was often available on farms and honey that could sometimes be obtained through local trade networks. This combination became popular at church fellowship meals, where both bread and dessert were needed, but ingredients were limited. Methodist Women's Circle of Rural Georgia published practical instructions in their 1933 community cookbook, explaining that buttermilk biscuits with honey turn daily bread into Sunday sweetness. The biscuits use buttermilk's acidity to create tender, flaky textures without requiring expensive dairy ingredients, while honey provided natural sweetness that complemented the biscuit's subtle tang. Church fellowship dinners frequently featured buttermilk biscuits with honey as dessert courses, especially in farming communities where both buttermilk and honey might be available through local connections rather than cash purchases. Women's groups appreciated how this combination provided both bread and dessert functions while utilizing ingredients that were often more accessible than traditional dessert components. Sunday school picnics sometimes included buttermilk biscuits with honey because they traveled well and provided portable sweet treats that satisfied both hunger and dessert desires. The combination's simplicity made it accessible to inexperienced bakers while still providing special occasion feelings that elevated community gatherings. What made buttermilk biscuits with honey particularly practical during the Depression was the utilization of byproducts and local resources rather than expensive store-bought ingredients, while the combination provided substantial nutrition beyond simple sweetness, making every component of the meal serve multiple purposes during times when efficiency and economy were essential for family and community survival. These 30 Great Depression church desserts aren't just historical curiosities. They're powerful reminders of human ingenuity and community support during America's darkest economic chapter. Church kitchens became laboratories where necessity sparked incredible creativity, turning the humblest ingredients into desserts that nourished both body and spirit. These recipes tell stories of resourcefulness, of stretching pennies and ingredients to feed families and communities. They remind us that good desserts don't always require expensive ingredients or complicated techniques. Sometimes the simplest treats. Did this journey through Depression-era church kitchens inspire your sweet tooth for more food history? If you enjoyed exploring these resourceful recipes, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into America's culinary past. Until next time, happy baking.